This is the day the Lord has made.
Amen.
We want to rejoice. We want to be glad in it.
Amen.
It's good to see each one of you. As I was greeting people today as they were coming in the door, this one lady said, "Who are you?" And I thought to myself, you think I'm a visitor. I've actually been here longer than any of you all. My name is Frank Bondurant. My father, Dad, why don't you wave? My dad, Frank Bondurant Sr., has family that has roots here in Farmville. The Guthrie family. His mother, his grandmother, and our history with this church, the Farmville Church, goes back to, for me, it goes back to like 55 years, something like that. We would come down once a year for a big family gathering, and I can remember doing that when I was like 9, 10 years old. Wow. That was a long time ago. So it's been a real joy for us as a family to partner with this church and to see how God has led this church over the years. I mean, we remember when the church was on High Street down in town, and it's just to see how things have transpired. And it's a joy to see all of you here today. It gives me hope, it gives me courage for the future to see that the Farmville Church, these beautiful people here, Bill, and this beautiful facility to God's glory, has a strong future here in this area. Amen. It has been a lighthouse in this community for a long time. And I'm very excited and looking forward after lunch today to go and visit this student center project that you have. I'm very thankful too for your pastor, Pastor Brian. And asked if, he's a young man, he has 4 churches. I've been in the ministry for about 39 years, but I've never had to pastor 4 churches. And so I really take my hat off to this young man, and I know he needs your prayers, that God will bless him and use him. And be an encouragement to your pastor. He's a young man, and God has brought him here for a reason, and he's given Brian certain gifts and talents for this time and for this place. So work together with your pastor. I presently have the opportunity to serve at the Columbia Union. And someone was asking me about what was going on in the Columbia Union these days. So I'm going to take just 3 minutes and just share with you some of the exciting news. Sometimes we forget when we come to church, and this is our church here, that we forget that we're a part of a much bigger family. And all of you are members of the Columbia Union Conference. The Columbia Union Conference is a gathering of our churches in the Mid-Atlantic region. Over 750 churches. And it comprises 7 states, 8 conferences. You're in the Potomac Conference. And it is one of I think it's our second biggest conference in the Columbia Union. And we have about 165,000 members in the Columbia Union. A couple of things I want to share with you that are pretty exciting that are going on is, first of all, in the Columbia Union, we have a very energetic and very exciting church planting movement that's going on. We are encouraging every pastor and every church to give thought to planting a church. We have over 750 churches in our union, and yet we have many, many areas within this 8-state territory that have not been penetrated by the gospel. That the Seventh-day Adventist message, we do not have a presence in. And so we have been really encouraging churches and pastors to plant churches. In fact, I'm kind of excited because this whole thing of the student center in town, it gives an opportunity to have a wider presence. And especially with Longwood College. But you'll be glad to know that your union, the Columbia Union, the family that you're part of, we have led the entire North American division for 4 years now when it comes to church planting. Last year, 2019, 61 church plants were funded.
Wow.
61 churches. So we give God the praise and the glory for that. Another exciting project I'll share with you real briefly is we have encouraged, we have challenged every conference to embark on what we're calling Mission to the Cities. And this is what we've asked. We've asked each conference to choose and to target one city in their territory. A special emphasis to the urban areas, to the cities. And so each of our 8 conferences have chosen a particular city. I believe Potomac Conference, they've actually chosen 2 cities, Norfolk, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. Norfolk, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And there are some exciting things that are going on in those cities. Right now, special emphasis on compassion ministries to the community, community services, evangelism. So please, just keep in mind that as you come here and you belong to this wonderful family here in Farmville, that you're also members of a much larger family.
Yes.
Columbia Union, the Potomac Conference. If you'll remember, especially during this time, the special emphasis of mission to the city, right here in North America. You know, I love watching Mission Spotlight and singing about the exciting projects overseas, but we have some pretty exciting things going on right here in the United States. And people need the Lord here just as much.
Amen.
I would ask also for special prayer. And I didn't ask for any prayer time for this, but I want to do it now. A colleague of mine, the vice president of our Columbia Union, his name is Robert Vandeman. Ever heard of Elder Robert Vandeman?
Yes.
I know you've heard of his uncle, George Vandeman.
Yeah.
Well, Rob Vandeman is our executive secretary for the Columbia Union. An incredible man of God, has been used in so many ways over the years. Used to be the pastor of the Spencerville Church, and then the pastor of the Chesapeake Conference. Elder Vandeman just this week was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And he's had emergency surgery, and the early news that I've heard is that it looks like it has spread, it has metastasized. And so I would ask that you would remember Elder Vandeman, mighty warrior for the Lord for many years. His wife Judy, as a nurse, she plays the harp, beautiful, beautiful ministry team. But they are having a very difficult time right now. And if you would keep them in your prayers, I know they would appreciate that. So, well, this morning I've got a message I brought to you. I prayed about it, and I feel this is what the Lord wants me to share. So let me begin by asking a question. Would you raise your hand if you can remember the year 1967? 1967. Do you know where you were? What you were doing?
Yes.
1967. I was 7 years old. 7 years old. But there was a movie that was released that year that was a big blockbuster hit. It was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Any of you remember that movie? There were 3 movie stars that who starred in that. Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, and Sidney Poitier. You remember? The story goes like this. It's about an upper-class, wealthy, liberal, white family whose daughter had been away at college. And she met a man. And they are engaged. And she wants to bring her fiancé home to meet her parents. And so as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of excitement and anticipation as they get to meet this young man that their daughter has fallen in love with and wants to spend the rest of her life with. And so the parents say, why don't we have a big dinner party? And so they plan a big dinner party. They invite their friends and their relatives. And finally, the big day comes, and everything is in place. The meal is ready. Family and friends have gathered, and the doorbell rings. And as they go to the door, there she is, their daughter, and there he is, her fiancé, a black man. And my, were they surprised. Remember, this was a upper class, wealthy, liberal, white family. And there he was, Sidney Poitier. And there was a moment of awkward silence. They were not quite sure what to say. But after a few awkward moments of silence and stammering and stuttering, they invited them to come in. And just as they were ready to sit down, the doorbell rang again. And this time, as they go to the door and answer it, it's his parents, who they had never met. But more importantly, his black parents didn't know that they were white either. And so as they open the door and they see it's a white family that their son is marrying into it, and then they are suddenly feeling very awkward. Very interesting movie. The rest of the movie is as they were trying to get past the awkwardness of the evening, as each set of parents, the black parents and the white parents, struggle with their own prejudice, their own fear, their own discomfort, and yet at the same time trying to do what's best to make their children happy. It's hard to appreciate how controversial that movie was in its day, 1967. Because we look at it from our angle today, where multiracial marriage, biracial marriage is no big deal, it's accepted, it's commonplace. But in 1967, it was a big deal. In fact, in 16 states, it was against the law. I want to look at a story in the Bible today. A story in the Bible about another awkward situation, if you will. A story about a surprise guest that shows up at a dinner. Unannounced and uninvited, and certainly unexpected. Equally as controversial and as provocative as the movie I just spoke about. But it wasn't just a matter of cultural diversity, as they were trying to discuss in the movie, or social etiquette. The story that we're going to look at in the scriptures today has at its very heart at the question the fairness of God's character. And in the balances hangs someone's eternal life. So open with me your Bibles, would you please? We're going to look at Luke chapter 7. Guess who's coming to dinner? Luke chapter 7. If you'll turn there, we're going to begin reading in verse 36. The Gospel according to Luke chapter 7. Are we all there?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, let's look at this together. I'm going to be reading from the New International Version. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, Jesus went to the Pharisee's house, and he reclined at the table. Now, it strikes me, before we go any further, a little odd. The Pharisees were not exactly fans of Jesus, were they?
No.
Who were the Pharisees? Well, they were the religious leaders of the day. They were the church leaders of the day. Very pious, very sincere, a bit standoffish from everyone else. And so it strikes me, first of all, that this Pharisee invited Jesus to his house. Apparently, he had a little bit of openness in his heart. Who exactly was this Jesus that they all say is the Messiah? Now, there are some people who say, and they connect this Pharisee with a story we find in Matthew 26 about a Simon the leper. Because as we read this story, we're going to find out that this Pharisee's name was Simon. And there are some who put the story in Matthew 26 along with this story, and they say, this Pharisee by the name of Simon is the same Simon that was a leper. We don't know that. But it's an interesting idea. That maybe he had been afflicted with leprosy, and Jesus had healed him, and as a way to express his appreciation, he invites Jesus to his house. We don't know. We don't know. But here we are at a dinner party. And there's lots of guests, and Jesus is the guest of honor, and there's conversation, and there's good food, and everyone's having a good time. Until the doorbell rings. Guess who came to dinner? Notice what the verses say here as we continue reading, verse 37. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet, weeping, she begins to wet his feet with what? Tears. Her tears. Then she wipes them dry with what? Her hair, kissing them and pouring perfume on them. My. Look who shows up at dinner. Unexpected, uninvited, and unwanted. Not a black fiancé, but a woman of questionable reputation. She comes to dinner that night, and wow, what a scene we have. She kneels at Jesus' feet, weeping, sobbing. Her emotions are out of control. Which you have to remember, in those days, women were expected to be very reserved. Unseen, not drawing attention to themselves. And then she does something which was extremely controversial. She was wearing a hair in her bun, and she let the bun out, and she lets her hair down. And no woman ever did that in front of a man in that culture. In those days, that was a signal that she was a certain kind of woman. In fact, there are rabbinic laws that allow a man to divorce his wife should she do such a thing. It was an awkward moment. Can you imagine? So what do we know about this woman? Well, we don't know much about her at all. We don't even know her name. Nameless. The text simply says she was what? A sinner. A sinner. I think it's interesting that the Bible doesn't tell us what her sins were. Apparently, she was such a notorious sinner that everyone already knew them. The Bible didn't have to tell it. But she was well known. Somehow along the way, we've come up with the conclusion that she was a prostitute, a woman of the night. But it's actually not here in this text. Now, it's interesting that some people will take this story of this nameless woman, a sinner, and they will link it to possibly that she was Mary of Bethany, Lazarus' sister. Others say, no, it could be that she was Mary of Magdala. Again, we don't know. Notice the story continues. When the Pharisee, verse 39, who had invited Jesus, saw all of this going on, he said to himself, he's thinking this. He doesn't actually say it. It says he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, and who is he talking about?
Jesus.
If this Jesus were a prophet, you see, he had invited Jesus to his home. He wanted to check Jesus out. He had heard the stories about him, about his questionable birth. He had heard the stories about the miracles and the healings. He had heard that people think that he was the Messiah. He invites him to his house. I'm going to check him out myself, Bill. Do a little bit of an investigation here. And when he sees all this transpiring, he begins to calculate in his own mind. He says, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of a woman that she is. And then for emphasis, it says she was a sinner. She was a sinner. We don't know much about this woman, but apparently Jesus had touched her life in some way. Maybe he had interacted with her in the past and had forgiven her sins. Maybe he had healed her. All we know is that in some way Jesus had impacted this woman's life. And as an expression of appreciation and gratitude, she shows up at that dinner that night, unexpected and uninvited. And she's beside herself with appreciation. She's beside herself with gratitude. She is crying and weeping, tears of joy, tears of thankfulness. She is a holy mess.
Yes.
Do you remember those Southwest airline commercials that they used to have where they would show someone in an awkward situation and then they would have the little tagline, "Want to get away?"
Oh.
Remember those?
Yes.
They were classic. I loved those commercials.
Yeah.
Want to get away? Well, someone wanted to get away at that dinner,
Amen.
right there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Jesus.
No.
And I don't think it was this woman.
No.
I think the one who wanted to get away was Simon, the Pharisee. I mean, he was a Pharisee. He was a religious guy. He was a church man. He had an image to protect, please. He was embarrassed that such a scene had been created at his party, that this woman had crashed his dinner party. And Simon is angry. Simon is scowling. Simon is judgmental and he is condemning. Simon is pretty sure that there's a sinner at the dinner that night. And he's pretty sure he knows who that sinner is. Then Jesus, as if to lessen the tension of the moment, to de-escalate the situation, Jesus in verse 40 says, "Simon, I have a story for you." Well, everybody loves a story, right?
Yeah.
"Tell me, teacher." Verse 41. "Two people owed money to a certain moneylender, Simon. One owed him 500 denarii. The other owed him how many? 50. Neither of these men had the money to pay him back, so he forgave their debts, both of them. Which of these men do you suppose loved him the most?" That's the question. Now, try as we might, we really can't relate to this story because, I mean, we don't deal with denarii these days. Our Bible commentaries will tell us that one denarii was equivalent to a full day's wage. So the one guy was 50, the other guy was 500. You know, an unbelievable amount of money. They both owed a lot of money. But let me liken it to a different comparison with you, just so that maybe it's something a little more contemporary that you can relate to. Think in terms of two men who show up at court. All right? Now, I don't know if you good people have ever been to court or traffic court or anything like that. Just pretend that you can understand this story, okay? Two men show up in court. One guy is accused of driving his car 55 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone. Think about it. 55 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone. In fact, it's worse than that. As he's going by that school zone, there is a school bus there picking up children, and the lights on the bus are flashing. And what are you supposed to do when the bus lights are flashing? Stop. You're supposed to stop, but this guy doesn't stop. He goes right through. And when the police finally catch up with this guy, to add insult to injury, they find that his blood alcohol is over 2 times the limit. And he has been previously arrested twice for DWI. Had lost his license and isn't even supposed to be driving. This is the man that owes 500 denarii. Do you get a better picture of who this guy is? And the debt that he owed? Now let's consider the other guy, the 50 denarii guy. Who is he? Well, he's in court too. And he is charged with going 63 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. 8 miles over the limit. However, you should know that when he was traveling on I-95. And it was 11 o'clock at night with very little traffic. You should also know that this is his first offense. He has a clean record. This is the guy that owes 50 denarii. So do you kind of get a picture of these two and who they were and their debts? Make no mistake about it, friends. Even though there's a huge contrast between these individuals, one thing they both have in common, they're both guilty. Yes. They both have broken the law. Amen. And they both deserve to be charged. Now Simon is in this room and is hearing Jesus tell this story. And Simon is thinking to himself, it's just a story. He doesn't realize that the characters of the story are in the room right now. And if Simon did understand for a moment that, oh, wait a minute, this is more than just a story, and maybe the people in the story are right here, who do you think Simon thinks he is? The 500 denarii guy or the 50 denarii guy? Yeah. And then Jesus asks that question, so which one of these guys is going to love him the most? The one who was forgiven the 500 denarii or the 50 denarii? The one who had the drunk driving arrests and goes blowing through a school zone? Or the one who was driving 8 miles over the limit? Who is going to be the most grateful? Who's going to be the most appreciative? Who is going to love the fact that his debt was canceled the most? And what does Simon say? It's right there. Look at it. What does it say? Verse 43. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. The one who had the bigger debt forgiven. And Jesus says to Simon, you have judged correctly. Verse 44, then Jesus turned to the woman. Now don't miss this. Very interesting to me. Yeah. Jesus turns and he looks at the woman. But then he's talking to someone else. Yeah. He's looking at the woman, but he's talking to Simon. Yeah, he is. Do you see this woman? I came into your house, Simon. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Simon, you did not give me a kiss of welcome, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. And here it comes. The knife goes straight in. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has been shown. For whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Whoever has been forgiven little loves little. A couple of points I'm going to bring to your attention this morning before we close. There is a connection, it's in this story, between self-awareness and grace. Self-awareness and grace. It's very important we understand how we see ourselves and that we have a correct image of ourselves. Having an accurate picture of our own character, our feelings, our motives, our desires. It's so important that we understand what's happening in our hearts. Because there is a connection, a direct connection between awareness, self-awareness, and experiencing God's grace. Amen. We see it in the story. This woman knew who she was. This woman understood that she was a sinner. She had no pretense. She didn't pretend to be somebody she wasn't. She knew that she was a sinner. And because she had an honest, open transparency about her shortcomings and her flaws and her failings and her mistakes, she was able to open herself up and receive God's grace and forgiveness. Because she saw herself right. Simon, this Pharisee, on the other hand, was not able to see himself right. He did not see himself as a sinner. He did not see himself as in need of forgiveness. He could not point to any mistakes or any flaws or any failings. He had kept God's law all the time. He felt no need for forgiveness. And because he did not see his true sinful self for what it was, his heart was closed. He could not accept or receive the grace of God. There is a direct connection on how we see ourselves and how we experience or don't experience God's grace. You see, folks, it's only when we see ourselves as God sees us. Amen. That we recognize and confess our sins and our need for a Savior. As a Seventh-day Adventist, do you think we tend to be more like Simon or more like this woman? I mean, we as Adventists, we tend to be pretty good people, don't we? We don't drink. We don't smoke. We don't do drugs. We don't cuss. Well, at least not too much. We practice the health message, especially around other Adventists. You get out that Ben and Jerry's when no one's around, maybe. We are good people. I can remember one dear lady in a church telling me, "Pastor, I am a fourth generation Seventh-day Adventist. I am an ASI, GYC, NAD, SDA, TMI. And sometimes I wonder if we as Adventists aren't simply too good for our own good. Because it makes it easy for us to be like Simon and we don't see our true spiritual condition.
Amen.
The spirit of Simon the Pharisee lives in the church today. Sometimes we tend to be arrogant, superior, self-righteous, prideful. But it's interesting to me that the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, a book that's writing about the last days, of what we can expect, what will we see happening in the world, pestilence, but also what we can expect to see in the church. The book of Revelation tells me that in the last days, the last day church is going to be a church that is lukewarm. A church that is called Laodicea. A church, in fact, well, let's look at it together for a minute here. Turn with me to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3. It is a church that is unaware of its true spiritual condition. Revelation chapter 3, verse 17. And notice what this church says. Because you say, I am rich, I have become wealthy, I have no need of anything. And you do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and what else? This is a last day church. The church that is existing just before Jesus comes back. And it's a church, it's a people that don't understand their true spiritual condition. Just like Simon. I think it's also very interesting if you look at the prescription for this church. How to fix this church. How to cure this church. What is the antidote for this lukewarmness? Verse 18. I counsel you to buy from me gold, refined in the fire, that you might truly be rich, and white garments, that you might be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. And then here's one. Anoint your eyes with what? So that, why?
So you can see.
So that you can see. So that you can really see what's happening with you. You can really see what's happening in your heart. What's going on in the pews. There's a connection between self-awareness, how we see ourselves, and our ability to experience God's grace. Amen. A second point. There is a connection between experiencing God's grace and our expression of gratitude.
Yes.
Amen. This woman had been touched by God, by Jesus in some way. He had changed her life. He had forgiven her sins. He had healed her soul. And as an expression of gratitude, she comes, falls at his feet, weeps at his feet with her tears, And she is just overwhelmed and overcome with gratitude.
Yes.
Her heart is overflowing, so thankful for what Jesus has done for me.
Amen.
Whereas Simon, because Simon never had a true picture of himself, he never saw his need, he had nothing to be thankful for. I'm not a debtor. What have you done for me? I haven't needed anything. So on the one hand, we've got this woman who is just beside herself with joy and appreciation and gratitude. And then we have Simon over here who is tight and who is reserved and who has no thankfulness and no appreciation. Gratitude opens our heart for God to work in our hearts and our lives.
Amen.
Gratitude and appreciation is so important in the Christian life.
Yes. Yes.
You ever notice that it's often the people who have the most difficult lives, who seem like they go from one terrible thing to the next terrible thing, that they are the people that often are the most grateful?
Yes.
Exactly.
Amen.
Praise the Lord.
How does that make sense? Whereas people who seem to just be coasting along through life, and everything's fine and rosy, and all the right things happen, they're often the most selfish, and the most ungrateful, and the most complaining.
Amen.
Gratitude. It requires that we understand that we are blessed people.
Amen.
That God has done something in my life.
Yes.
This woman got it.
Yes.
She understood it.
Yes.
She knew that God had done something for her.
Yes.
And she wanted everybody to know.
Amen. Yes.
Simon didn't get it at all.
No.
Because not only did he, well notice, he disrespected Jesus.
Yes.
If he had truly had any sense of appreciation, he would have made sure that a servant was at the door to wash the feet.
Yes.
Even if he didn't want to do it himself, sister,
Amen.
he would have had someone there.
Yes.
That was common courtesy.
Yes.
He would have made sure that he would have embraced Jesus and give him the customary welcome, shake of the hand, elbow bump, whatever it is. He didn't give him any of that. He disrespected Jesus.
Yes.
Gratitude. There is a connection between gratitude and grace.
Yes.
This woman had been transformed by Jesus' grace, and she was grateful, which in turn allowed her to experience more grace.
Yes.
Simon, his heart was closed. He never saw his need. He had nothing to be thankful for, which closed his heart to receiving gratitude or more grace. One more. A connection between seeing ourselves as we really are and experiencing God's grace. A connection between grace and gratitude. But finally, there's also a connection between gratitude and how we treat other people. And how we treat other people. This woman, who knew she was a sinner, not worthy, not deserving of anything, and yet God had done something for her, and she's so thankful for His grace, she comes in and she ministers and she serves. She's humble. She looked at Jesus with love and served Him. Simon, who never saw his need, who never felt thankful, who never experienced God's grace, notice how he treats first Jesus, and then look how he treats the woman. One of the telltale signs of anyone you can tell who has genuinely experienced God's grace is look at the way they treat other people.
Amen. Amen.
We can profess our religion, but what really matters is how we treat other people.
Amen.
That shows the true seed of our religion.
Amen.
He looks down on this woman. He feels better than this woman. He feels superior to her. She is a sinner. What is she doing in my house? A connection between knowing who we are and our experience, our ability to experience God's grace. A connection between experiencing grace and the way that we show gratitude. Living a life of gratitude. And a connection between gratitude and how we treat other people.
Yes. Yes. Amen.
I want to close by asking the question, where are you in the story today? Jesus wants to come to all of your homes for dinner. Do you have eyes that see yourself as you truly are? How thankful and grateful are you? Do you have a spirit of gratitude today? How do you feel and treat other people? How is your heart? Is it broken and transformed by God's grace? Let each one of us experience what this woman experienced. And may it be seen by the way that we respond to God in our service, in our devotion, but let it also be seen how we respond to God's children.
Amen.
And our willingness to serve them as well.
Yes.
Let's sing the closing song together. Jesus paid it all, the last two verses, 184, verses 3 and 4. Simon couldn't sing that song. Or if he could sing the song, he would have said, well, there's a big debt for the woman that Jesus paid, but for me, you got off easy. Didn't have such a big debt. Jesus paid it all, friends.
Yes.
Oh.
Let's sing.
You ever stand together?